just miles from a UN peacekeeping base in eastern Congo, around 200 women and children were repeatedly raped. Former Rwandan and local rebels are accused of being behind the 4-day raping spree. Just who is to blame for failing to protect these victims? This is Inside Story. Hello and a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Congo celebrated 50 years of independence in June, but despite its freedom, the country is still plagued by many conflicts on many fronts. In the latest incident, aid groups have reported the rape of almost 200 women in the eastern area of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Rwandan HUTU FDLR insurgents took over the eastern town of Luvungi and nearby villages for 4 days. In that time, they raped men, women and children, often dragging them into the surrounding forests. Haunted by FDLR and militia, the east of Congo has now been labelled the rape capital of the world. Rich in minerals, it is home to coltan, widely used in mobile phones. Tin is there, gold and diamonds, all retrieved from the hillsides of the eastern Congo. And it is control of these minerals that has fueled the country's conflict and the subsequent sexual violence. More than 200,000 rapes have been reported since the conflict began more than a decade ago. And the recent withdrawal of almost 2,000 UN peacekeeping troops could make the situation a lot worse. I'm joined by guests in Washington, D.C., Jacques Bahati. He's a policy advisor at the Africa Faith and Justice Network. Also in the U.S. Capitol, COLIN Thomas JENSEN. He's an analyst on Congolese affairs. And in Oxford, Maya Mailer. She's a policy advisor at OXFAM International. Welcome, all three of you. Let's start off with you, Mr. Bahati. As a Congolese, this sort of news must chill you to the bone, this sort of incident that happens time and time again. What do you think happened in this incident, and why did it happen?
Thank you for having us, particularly having me on this show. What happened? That is a question of investigation, but we know that the victims have a name, and therefore we believe that once again the government was unable to protect the citizens, and this is terrible, and we deplore what happened.
What do you think it says about the psyche of the people who committed this? We had reports of men running in and out of the villages, picking and choosing the victims that they want, gang raping women and children.
Well, my first question is to those who started the war. They now see what they have done to the Congolese people now for about 15 years or so. So they have to bear the responsibility for the pain that they have caused to the Congolese people. And I do believe that the victims of recent attacks are just a small number of the whole picture. And so it is painful to see that we continue to witness such a big scale of attacks against the
Mr. Bahati has made a point there, isn't it? I mean, this is just a small picture of a much larger scene that is unfolding in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Oxfam has been working in Eastern Congo for many years, and we speak with communities on the ground, and there are shocking levels of violence and abuse taking place on an everyday basis, and ordinary men, women and children are suffering as a result of extreme acts of violence that are being perpetrated by rebels, the FDLR, the Mai group, as well as sections of the Congolese army.
Tell us what happens to the victims in a society such as the Congolese society. What happens to them after this, and what sort of impact does it have on them?
Well, when women, children and men are raped, there's a lot of stigma attached to the rape, and often women they've gone through a terrible trauma, and then on top of that they may lose their husbands, the support of their family, and they often find themselves alone without livelihoods and without access to basic medical care, exacerbating what has already been a very, very traumatic experience.
Mr. Thomas Jensen, what do you think happened here? Why it took so long for the news to come out? Why there's still no statement by the UN? Who is hiding what here?
Well, it's a very isolated part of the country, and the United Nations is a cautious organization generally. I think they're sending out a human rights team to investigate the situation to find out exactly what happened, and I think then we will see a statement. What we have seen is an NGO, International Medical Corps, reported this incident and has numbers, and it's pretty clear that they were there on the scene very quickly, documenting the atrocities. And I think what happened here was you had a Congolese army unit deployed in that area. They withdrew, and when they left, the FDLR, the Rwandan militia, moved in and attacked civilians as revenge, as a reprisal.
Are you saying that the Congolese army, excuse me interrupting, might be complicit in this, or that the armed groups possibly have some sort of support?
Not necessarily complicit, but when troops move around, it opens up areas, it opens up vacuums, areas where populations are not protected. And so if a Congolese army unit withdraws from an area and they've been stationed there for some time, the FDLR, the militia, perceives that the population has been cooperating with the Congolese army. And when they leave, the FDLR then return and attack the population. It's a pattern we've seen in Congo really for the past 10 to 15 years.
Mr. Bahati, it also says a lot about the way the UN operates, doesn't it? I mean, the fact that in a country so vast and so densely populated and with so many forests, it's very difficult to keep the peace in a situation like this.
Yes, many people tend to evaluate the performance of the UN peacekeeping mission in Congo and forget, first and foremost, to evaluate the performance of the Congolese government. Basically, it is otherwise telling the Congolese people that your livelihood and your future lays in the hands of the international community, which is the wrong message to send to the Congolese people and to the Congolese government.
Do you think that's why the government...
Whatever happens to the Congolese people...
Do you think that's why the government is calling on the United Nations to withdraw? Is it a question of sovereignty here?
No, the Congolese government might be calling the withdrawal of the calling on the withdrawal of the UN peacekeeping mission for political reasons. I believe and I suspect President Kabila might be trying to rig the elections which are coming up very soon. So that would be is a political move. However, I do believe the UN has something to do, but the UN cannot and will never guarantee the stability and the security of the Congolese people. That is the mission of the Congolese government. That is the mission of the Congolese army.
What do you make of that, Mr. Thomas Jensen?
Well, I think Jacques is absolutely right. And I think here again we have to recognize that fixing the Congolese army, making the Congolese army a more professional force that's capable of protecting the Congolese population is not a short-term endeavor. This is a project that's likely going to take 10, 15, 25 years with international support and I think Jacques is absolutely right here again, a Congolese government that demonstrates a real willingness to take difficult steps toward reform. That means curbing corruption, that means eliminating some of the worst human rights abusers from the ranks, and it means really accepting a broad program that's internationally backed to provide training and equipping as well as strategic guidance on how to conduct operations and delicate counterinsurgency operations such that they would need to do to get rid of the FDLR.
Part of the UN's remit is to look after the Congolese army, to work alongside the Congolese army. So do you think their presence has, by extension, allowed a lot of these atrocities to happen?
I don't think it's fair to say that their presence has allowed these atrocities to happen. I think that certainly in some instances the presence of UN troops has acted as a deterrent against armed groups, both the Congolese army as well as militia, local militia and foreign militia from attacking civilians. But the problem is the area they're asked to cover and the capabilities that they have are simply not, the area is too large and the capabilities are inadequate. They simply can't be everywhere at once and protecting such a large population over such a large area. And so there are going to be pockets, there are going to be vacuums, civilians are going to be vulnerable, and when they're vulnerable, as we've seen in Congo, largely because of the impunity, that no one fears retribution for committing these types of crimes will occur.
Ms. Mela, as you know, the government wants the UN to leave. The government wanted the UN to be out by 2011. That's not going to happen at this stage, but 2,000 peacekeepers have withdrawn. How difficult is this going to make your work there?
Well, I think there are a number of issues that both of the speakers have touched upon. And the first is that there absolutely needs to be reform of the armed services. And what communities say to us all the time is that the soldiers need to be paid. The soldiers need provisions for their accommodation and for food, because it's encouraging a predatory approach on the population. You have soldiers coming in without who haven't received their salaries, and they're turning to ordinary people for food and lodging. So that's one thing, together with strong military justice. But what we've been saying at OXFAM is that it's very difficult to reform the army while the army is actually actively engaged in military operations, internationally backed military operations in Eastern Congo to deal with the threat from the rebel group. And what we're seeing is that the result of these military operations is actually doing more harm than good. And communities are crying out for alternative solutions. And they would like to see a political solution to dealing with some of the militia threats, because it's the communities that bear the brunt often of these military operations.
But
on your question on the UN.
Go ahead.
Yeah. We think ultimately it's the Congolese army and the Congolese government that needs to provide security, but the UN does have a key role to play. It's not a long-term solution, but it's a very important short-term solution. And as Colin said, the UN has played a very important deterrent role, and we would urge the UN peacekeeping mission, MONUSCO, to be as proactive as possible in protecting people from violence.
Okay. Let's try and get, excuse me interrupting here, let's try and get to the root of this problem, this rape, this indiscriminate killing. Mr. Thomas Jensen, do you think it's all got to do with mineral resources? Do you have these armed militia groups fighting for the mineral resources, these big corporations, as well as the army?
Well, I think that's certainly a part of it. I think, you know, the conflict in Eastern Congo is one of the most complex conflicts in the world, with multiple causes, a lot of conflict really driven at the local level, conflict over land, conflict over citizenship. But what's happened with the incredible mineral wealth that's Congo is that as a war economy has developed, where conflict becomes profitable for armed groups. They can go in, they can control mining areas, they can exploit minerals illegally, they can tax roads, they can tax populations that are there. And this is now the fuel, as you said earlier, that is really driving the conflict. It's not the underlying cause of the conflict, but the presence of minerals and the amazing amount of money that these armed groups are making from selling them is really keeping the conflict going, and we'll keep it going until we come up with a solution.
And that's a problem, isn't it? If it's one of the poorest countries in the world, how do you put a stop to such a lucrative business? You don't, do you?
Well, it's very difficult. I think there's been some effort made through legislation in the United States to try to get companies who are sourcing minerals in the Congo to bring some transparency to their supply chains. But the issue really has to be tackled from both sides, not only from the demand side, but from the supply side as well. And that's where, and going back to a point Jacques made earlier, the Congolese government has to play an important role here. It's ultimately the responsibility of the Congolese government to get control over their own mining sector and curb illegal mining. And what we know through various reports, particularly the UN group of experts is that Congolese politicians themselves benefit significantly from chaos in the east and from the mining trade.
Okay, let's put that to Jacques, as soon as he touched on it a little earlier. Do you think that we also have a role to play in this, considering that the coltan, which is used in mobile phones, means that most of us are carrying a bit of this war, a bit of this rape in our pockets? Is there something that we could do?
Well, I want to underscore the fact that every person who carries a cell phone must know that they carry somehow a part of Congo. I want to emphasize the fact that the minerals have been in Congo for a long time, and before the war started, the Congolese people were at peace. Going back to where the war came from is where the solution to this problem lays. You spoke about FDLR committing crimes, but the FDLR's enemy are not the Congolese people. Rwanda is their country, and they can't go back. Therefore, we can't speak about a possible solution without speaking to Rwanda and what the Rwandan government is doing in continuing this crisis in the Congo.
But what can the Rwandan government do? Because they have already stepped over the border into your country to try and put a stop to the FDLR. What more can they do than that?
Well, they invaded the Congo, and some people think that the Rwandan government left. They haven't left the Congo yet. They are after the FDLR, and this, as long as this continues to go on, there will be victims. So when we speak about possible solutions, we have to speak about to Rwanda and see what kind of solutions the Rwandan government can bring to the table, so the Congolese people can enjoy their peace. We have lobbied and asked the Rwandan government to open political space for the Hutus in the country. They just finished elections. 93% people elected Paul Kagame, but where is the space for the Hutus? And that is a big problem, and the international community continue to praise Kagame, forgetting that Kagame has some things to do and has to account for some things that are going on in the Great Lakes, including the atrocities in the Congo. And we have to underscore the fact that the Congolese government, the leadership is not there, and that's why Kagame is praising and running business in the Congo.
Mr. Thomas Jensen, is that what it's all about? The fact that there is no leadership, the fact that the FDLR can cross over as and when it chooses to, and why do you think they would join up with the Mai Mai? What's behind that?
Yeah, well, there's certainly a crisis of leadership in the Congo. I think there's no doubt there, as well as Jacques noted, a real lack of true, I think, representative democracy in neighboring Rwanda. And this is all contributing to this churning conflict in the east. You know, with respect to, you know, where this is going, you know, I think what Jacques' talking about and really finding political solutions, I think here is where you have to start. You know, really aggressive diplomacy internationally. What we don't have now, and really since President of Congo was elected in 2006, President Kabila, we haven't had a real consensus internationally, diplomatically, on what to do about the Congo. It's very much a project mentality. Different donors have different ideas about what's best for Congo. The Congolese government has used this to really play donors off one another. And we haven't yet seen a concerted international effort on everything from security sector reform to justice sector reform to curbing the legal minerals trade to curbing corruption and really bringing a better, more democratically elected government to Congo.
And putting a stop to this horrendous rape. Ms. Mailer, as Thomas Jensen was talking, they were looking at pictures of Hillary Clinton. She was in the country over a year ago, and she was horrified about what was going on in the country, and she said something's got to be done about it, it's got to be stopped. Have you noticed any difference since she's been there?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, we recently conducted a survey of communities in areas where the Congolese government has been conducting military operations, and what they tell us is that the situation has got worse, and women and children in particular feel that their security situation has got worse because they're often targeted for reprisal attacks by rebel groups, by the FDLR and the Mai Mai, and they're often subject to abuse by sections of the Congolese army. So unfortunately for ordinary people in Eastern Congo, things have not got better, and in some instances they've actually got worse, and they're still suffering. There are new reports of violence in both North and South Kivu, and tens of thousands of people are having to flee their homes. You know, and what these people want is to be able to get on with their lives, to cultivate and to farm in freedom without fear of attack from
it must really shock you,
groups, and that's not happening.
The fact that someone like Hillary Clinton from the US, one of the most powerful countries in the world, can go to the Congo and be absolutely shocked and say, we're going to do something about it. Nothing gets done about it. No other countries are joining in to put a stop to this. Why is that?
Well, I think, as Colin said, it's a very complicated, complex conflict, and simply expressing outrage is not going to make a difference. There needs to be a concerted effort to reform the army, to explore political solutions, to provide humanitarian and development aid to those who need it, and there needs to be political will on the side of the Congolese government and the international community.
Mr. Thomas
And
Jensen,
there have been some steps. Some steps have.
Do you think, excuse me interrupting again, do you think if the government is in crisis, which is something I think you're alluding to, that the knock-on effect could make the situation even worse in the country?
I absolutely think that's the case. I think, you know, this is a government that seems to be losing, despite the fact that it's arguing for its sovereignty, it's claiming that that the crisis in the East is abating and that the United Nations peacekeeping force can leave. We are seeing an increase in violence, not just in East, but in other parts of the country. In Equateur, in the West, recently a rebellion that the government didn't even know about until the United Nations told them. So the Congolese government's ability to control their territory, to fend off a violent attack from armed groups that seek to undermine government authority is very poor right now. And coming up to elections, I do think it's possible that we're going to see more violence, not just in the East, but throughout the country.
Mr. Bahati, coming up to those elections, 50 years after independence, is there any reason for hope in the Congo?
Yes, there is a lot of reason for hope, because in 50 years, the Congo has produced great people. We have doctors and many professionals of Congolese nationality across the globe. So there is something to celebrate. However, there is a lot of work ahead. I wanted also to add the fact that the international community has failed the Congolese people. When, for example, here at Africa Faith and Justice Network, we approach the US government and say, the Rwandan government continues to interfere in the Congo, we don't have any response. And the US government has been playing safe and protecting their interests in Rwanda, while the Congolese people were being killed and raped by the Rwandans. Today, we continue to appeal to the US government, saying the Rwandan government has to identify its national its citizens that were incorporated in the Congolese army while they were integrating Nkunda's forces, but nobody has pushed that agenda. Therefore, we are expecting more violence to erupt in Eastern Congo, because the Congolese army has been infiltrated by Rwandan soldiers. Okay. And that is a key element to the political crisis.
And they need to do that soon, otherwise women and children continue to suffer. Jacques Bahati talking to us there, also joined by Colin, Thomas Jensen and Maya Mailer. Thank you, all three of you, for your time. It was very interesting. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.